Well, hello, everyone. You are on the air with The Shake-Up. You are listening to WELT 95.7 FM. Comes to you from the main library of downtown Fort Wayne via the tower at Indiana-Purdue Fort Wayne University. WELT is generously funded by the Friends of the Library, who encourage all Allen County residents to come to any branch library and read a book. Today, the Shake-Up is very privileged to have Brother Kevin Muhammad, diligent, faithful, registered member of the Nation of Islam, and Dean Robinson of Summit City Noise in the studio to discuss cohesiveness or lack thereof in the Black community. Welcome, gentlemen, to the show.
Thank you, dear sister. Assalamu alaikum to everybody, which means peace and blessings be unto you. Thank you for the opportunity to be on your show once again.
Thank you. Well, welcome, Dean.
It's always a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
That's right. That's right. Well, I have two opposing views here. One view is that Black cohesiveness is mandatory and a must, from Brother Kevin Muhammad. And then I have Dean, who says Black cohesiveness is not even possible in today's culture. And I'm curious now, I'm going to keep my comments to myself because I have you two experts on my show today to kind of give your input about it and some background behind it. I'm very big on facts and just share your knowledge. So I'm going to start with Dean, if it's okay. Dean, you do not believe Black cohesiveness is possible. Or am I phrasing that wrong? Give me your stance on that, like where you stand when it comes to that.
Well, when you're talking in absolute terms, when you say Black community, that just means every Black person, every person of a certain skin tone is immediately part of a community. And well, if that's your parameters, if the skin just says, hey, that makes you a member of this community, then there is a Black community. Now, when you talk about these ideologies, I realize, there are going to be different subgroups that are going to divide what you would call this Black community. And so I've talked with Kevin Muhammad often on Facebook, typically, sometimes through these discussions that Eric Hackley used to provide. And so I've typically kind of boiled it down to a couple of just hot button issues, even though we can broaden this out. But I talk a lot about Black Lives Matter and the queer Black women who founded it. And I use that phrase, queer Black women, because the women who founded Black Lives Matter, that's how they describe themselves. So it's Patrisse Cullors, Opal Tometi, and Elisa Garza. And so they even have on their website, Black Lives Matter, Elisa Garza talking about the theft of the work of queer Black women. She's bummed about charismatic Black men co-opting Black Lives Matter. She's mad about NBC's Law and Order co-opting the movement. But it's this Black Lives Matters with this queer Black women driving it. Well, that tends to rub up against people like the irritated genie. He's got what he calls straight Black pride. And so I can't remember this guy's name. It's Ayo something, but he used to work for the Department of Homeland Security from 2009, I think, to 2013 or 2014. But he's also online talking about all this Black separation stuff, and he wants these wars and calling for all this violence. But nonetheless, he is now not working for the Department of Homeland Security anymore. He's the irritated genie. And if you look on YouTube, he has one of his, a seminar where he's talking about this straight Black pride. Well, there's a female member of Black Lives Matter there. And basically, he lets her know, look, we're not going to accept your sexuality. We don't like it. If you think we're going to accept it, we're not. I don't know if she got kicked out of the meeting or she left, but people were happy when she left. And so that's just one example. These kind of gender lines and identities, that's just one example where within Black Lives Matter, you're going to have Black people who are repulsed by it. And so the cohesion that Black Lives Matter is looking for, it will not happen there because of queer Black women. And in the Black community, a lot of homophobic men, and they'll typically grab onto some type of religion, whether it's Christianity, usually Christianity in America, but they'll use that to justify. They're going to tell you what God knows and what God wants and what God doesn't like. And he really doesn't like this men laying with men, but he doesn't like railing. He doesn't like extortion. He doesn't like a lot of things, but we're really going to focus on this gender stuff. And so that proves to be very divisive in the black community. And within Black Lives Matters itself, it's divisive.
So, Brother Kevin, you heard what he had to say. It can't exist, and if I'm quoting you right, between the genders.
I'm not saying cohesiveness or groups are going to exist. So Black Lives Matters exists. Black Lives Matters is not going to be appealing to all black people. Black Lives Matters is going to be a subset of this black community that you're talking about. I'm not saying that partnership is impossible. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is when this phrase black community is used, it's too broad. It's too broad. And if you think white people are aligned in a white community, you'll be shocked to find out they are not. So that's where I'm coming from. So does that clear things up? Does that clear it up for you?
Well, I'm still listening and learning. I'm still listening. For me, I do believe cohesiveness can exist.
So do I.
But I'm curious, like, I also know that there are some barriers to it.
And that's all I'm saying.
And I believe that, one, we have to be honest about the barriers to address them. If you don't face a problem, you can't deal with a problem. I had gone to an example, I went to the Million Man March. At the Million Man March, for as much as Nation of Islam is one thing that I like about the Nation of Islam is they hosted this event. This is why I'm referencing them. They hosted the Million Man March. They hosted the Million Family March. The one thing that I liked about them, which made me believe in black cohesiveness, is that they do not support homosexuality or the feminization of black men. But what they do support is work being done in the black community. So at this rally that was, you knew that it was the Nation of Islam. You were checked by them at the door. They surrounded the place. They were our security. They patrolled. There was no doubt in your mind that this is who was putting on this event. Black Lives Matters was there, and they were given time on the stage. So for a group who people would say they're against homosexuality, they were very much a part of doing the work in the black community to make us better. So I'm cautious as to how, I guess for today's show is helping me to define cohesiveness. Like, I'm looking for a clear definition, because there's so many people talking about cohesiveness, but even within our own homes, and man and female homes, and women homes, there's not cohesiveness. And two people working together, we will have more homes owned. We would have more children cohesively raised within the family and not straying and leaving and following the suits of their peers instead of, the traditions of family. So I'm trying to come up with a clear definition for myself and allow my audience to hear some perspectives about cohesiveness. Where do you come in all this, Brother Muhammad?
Can cohesiveness happen? And does it exist? I think it's kind of like two different questions and many different parameters. Does it exist? Yes, on some level. Another word for this cohesiveness is a black united front. You referenced the Million Man March, not only the Million Man March, but the Million Family March and the Millions More movement. Not only was it hosted by the Nation of Islam, but you had national representatives from the Native American community. You had representatives from our Latino community. When we talk about the black community and our teachings from the Nation of Islam, that's not just dark-skinned people. We recognize the Native Americans and blacks as one people. So teaches the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and the so-called Mexican community and the so-called Latino community. Have we exercised that? How many black organizations were represented at the Millions More movement and the Million Man March? Can it happen? Yes, it can happen. We've demonstrated that. Is there room for improvement? Absolutely. I like the way Mr. Robinson, when he described what community is. He didn't say it in this broadcast, but in a previous conversation. He mentioned about how community involves your economic development and the control of the resources in your community. That's a very important point. We're not there yet. We have a ways to go. But we have many different reference points that it has happened and we can have it happen again. The point, well, we can reference Black Wall Street. I think most of us are familiar with that history, where in the early 1900s, or really the late 1800s, we saw black towns with over 600 businesses, banks, airplanes, and so forth that we were able to achieve at that time. And the envy and the jealousy of black accomplishment caused those who hated our accomplishments to do what they did. I think terrorism, and I'll say this point and I'll close on this point, is a political term that's used popularly today. But we've experienced domestic terrorism ever since we've been in this country. It was never styled as that. How many people died in the World Trade Center? They're given the number of approximately 3,000. How many people were massacred in Black Wall Street? 3,000. But it never was called an act of terrorism.
No, and actually, the CIA blamed us. It was their records say I could. And this
blame
is,
the victim.
Yeah, it said that it was blacks. It was, for lack of a better word, because I can't use the exact word. It was black on black crime that caused this problem. They brought it on themselves, is what the CIA said.
Right.
So that was not termed as the government's problem. It was termed as we did that to ourselves.
Right. The reason I'm making that point is about Black Wall Street as a reference point. What was the prerequisite that brought that about?
Segregation.
We had to do it.
Yeah.
We had to do it. We were forced to do it. Jim Crow laws. You couldn't go where their establishments were. So if you wanted something, you had to do it. And unfortunately, we fell for the trick of integration. And we thought that when the offer of integration was made, that we were somehow making a come up. Now we can go where they go. We can eat where they eat. We can be buried where they're buried. So our standard of success was, how close can we get to white establishment to determine our success? So my point in saying all of that is this. Once again, we are about to be forced not to go back to segregation, but and definitely not colonization, but separation. With the rise in violence perpetrated from those outside of our community or who are policing our communities, with the racial tensions that's at an all-time high in America, this is just the beginning. This outright slaughter of unarmed black males, particularly, and black women. This is on the increase. As the Bible says, this is just the beginning of sorrows. But as this increases, we're going to be forced to separate, either here in America or elsewhere.
How do you feel about that, Dean?
Well, what I love about Kevin Muhammad is that he brings the truth. And in our interactions, a lot of times on Facebook, the two of us can bring it real strong. Sometimes I'm dogging Kevin, he'll dog me. But what I find in that discourse, in whatever we're talking about, and you're going to find today, we're going to get along probably too well for radio. We're getting along too good for radio. But I'm going to find that
it's never personal, brother. It's never personal.
But men like us and women like you, Janine, well, we bring these ideas out. And that's something that I always loved about Eric Hackley. Because Eric Hackley did not pretend like he had all the answers. But he was willing to talk about them, willing to bring in all these people together. And then sometimes there are certain things that I would say where he's like, Dean, you got to say that again. Say that one more time. And that's when I realized, wow, I just added something to Eric's his quiver of arrows, I just added an arrow in there that he didn't know. And so Brother Muhammad is going to bring this truth. And so you're not going to see a lot of backlash to this. Now, what I find telling is a lot of times we have this tendency to talk about these general issues. We talk about things so broadly. And so when we start talking about black community, but then we start talking about Black Wall Street, and then we're talking about economic responsibility and development. Okay, well, let's talk about Fort Wayne, Indiana. Because in Fort Wayne, Indiana, well, we do have brothers getting shot by the cops. Because when was it? Was it last year? When I guess there was a police car, an unmarked car.
Yeah, and shot the boy.
And there were three boys that apparently approached the car.
Yeah,
but there's so many versions of the story.
Yeah.
Yep.
The car's approaching them, but the cop gets out and shoots one of them. So he fires 3 shots. One of the bullets hits the boy. Now, my question to Michael Joyner, ever since then, and the cops, is what happened to those other 2 bullets? Did you guys even look into it? Do you care, Fort Wayne police? Do you care about firing bullets in the hood? Are you more careful in other neighborhoods? And so when you get on Smith Street or Pontiac, you're just willing to just start firing? But we know where one of those bullets landed, inside a young man. But where did the other 2 bullets go? These are the kind of things I want to see people other than me asking Michael Joyner about. I want to see people with a broader profile. Maybe like Glenn Hines. Why isn't he asking about the Fort Wayne police and what happened to those other 2 bullets? Why isn't he asking about that?
I'm going to ask a tough question.
Why isn't Glenn Hines? Go ahead.
Why do you think they don't ask? Like if
Okay, so why aren't people asking the tough questions?
Why do you feel like they don't ask?
With Wayne TV and all these major TV stations in town with the network affiliates, they take government and police reports as the gospel truth. It is their basis for truth. Anything outside that narrative is questionable. When they get that press release, they'll let you know what's up. Because I believe it's this case, is one of these cases, I believe it was the case on Lewis Street where the 3 brothers from South Sudan got blown away. Okay?
That got national coverage.
Yeah, it got national coverage. But Michael Joyner, he's saying, well, we're going to find out that it's just an isolated incident because you've heard that a couple of these guys are Muslims, but it has nothing to do with their religion. You've heard that they're from South Sudan, but it has nothing to do with their nationality. And we're going to find it's just it's just an isolated incident because you had your drug task force watching that house for weeks. They're watching it. These mugs staked out in front of it, but somehow, triple homicide goes on there, but nobody challenging. But why are they not challenging? Why does Wayne TV not challenge? Because if you say something negative, if you ask the wrong question to somebody like Mayor Tom Henry, if you ask him the wrong question, a question he doesn't want to hear, Mayor Henry will tell you, like he told me, if you ever do that to me ever again, I'll never talk to you. Now, if you watch Wayne TV, Brett Thomas and Mayor Tom Henry engaged in a love affair. Do you understand Wayne TV did a story about Mayor Tom Henry shaving off his mustache? They did a story about it. And in the story, you got Mayor Henry talking about his favorite people that don't have mustaches throughout history. I think George Washington's one of them, maybe Thomas Jefferson, and then his third hero without a mustache, Brett Thomas. Brett Thomas Henry. And so local media in a love affair with government and these cops. And Glenn Hines doing nothing for his district because the Republicans don't even run a candidate. So he doesn't have to do anything. He does nothing, but when these mugs are calling for a tax increase for downtown riverfront development, who's right there standing next to the mayor? Glenn Hines.
Well, I got a question.
Where is the black leadership? Where is the criticism of Glenn Hines? Where is the local criticism? Why am I the only one bringing it?
I think we can coin. There's a term coined for this, and it's called self-hate.
Well, why am I the only one? Why is Summit City Noise and Dean Robinson producing these videos about Pat Miller and WoWo, producing videos about Wayne TV, about WPTA, how derelict they are?
Because those people don't care about the cohesiveness of the black community.
Well, why is
now Glenn Hines most definitely should, because he's one of our elected officials for that.
So I'm just going to say, my thing, when we're talking about this black community, talk about Fort Wayne. Now, Kevin Muhammad,
He's been here long.
I made it clear to you about Pat Miller on WOWO AM. On a regular basis, he dogs Islam, dogs Muslims.
I don't listen to him.
Well, I know, and that's the problem. That's the problem.
I should listen to him?
I need you to listen to him, Kevin.
Maybe I should talk to him.
I need you to listen first.
Maybe I can have you two on my show.
Because what happens is WOWO is very influential in Indiana. If you say that Pat Miller and WOWO aren't influential, okay, you can say that. But if they're not influential, WOWO is reflecting white male domination in America. They're doing it 24/7. But what happens is people who are inclined to disagree with him, well, they ignore him and instantly malign him. And so they're not paying attention to what's being broadcast.
Dean, I have to reel you back in. We are getting away from cohesiveness.
No, we're not.
I
we're
want
not.
to say that on this point, because what we're talking about, he's bringing up pertinent issue.
Local.
He's bringing up a pertinent issue. Now, this is the way that I like to operate with people. You said you believe that cohesiveness in the black community can happen.
Yes.
Okay, good. There's always challenges to accomplishing a goal. What we want to focus on first is where we have similarities and agreement before we address where we differ and how we can't do something. So how can we, Dean Robinson, Kevin Muhammad, how can we have cohesiveness to address the issues of Fort Wayne? That's what we want to talk about.
Well, with Dean Robinson and Kevin Muhammad, it's largely going to be through these conversations because that's what I do. I'm not a guy who carries the sign. I'm not a politician. I'm not a fundraiser. I'm a guy who researches and then I produce these videos. And sometimes I do the podcast, but mainly it's just video production with all this research where I talk about these issues, I talk about what's happening, and I show you the sources. So my job, I guess, is just communication. So how can you and I work? It's going to be this communication and these dialogues. And so I 100% agree with you. It is going to be these commonalities that bring us together because we can talk about the things that separate us.
That's easy.
And if those things are so great, then we may not be able to work together. But from what I know of you and your beliefs and what the Nation of Islam beliefs of what I know, well, there's not anything that's so much there that we can't work together.
Exactly.
There are going to be things that I'm going to say, well, Kevin, I don't agree. I might even say, Kevin, you're wrong. But it's usually I'm going to say I don't agree.
Right.
Rather than just to say
that's intelligent.
Somebody's wrong.
That's intelligent.
Because sometimes I don't know. Yeah. And there's going to be so many different experiences that people have. And so I always talk about this notion with this black community. I always have to bring up how throughout my whole life, even as an adult, black people in my family, black people I've known, talk about how I talk white, I act white. Sometimes a black man can't be black enough. And so that's when I talk about sometimes this notion of cohesion falls off, but not everything's 100% all the time. Sometimes when you go into a battle, whatever, you go with what you got. You're not 100%, right. But sometimes you can still get that victory. That's right. And so, yeah, you're going to find we're not going to argue that much. But I guess I'm asking you to listen to WOWO. Don't just put them aside and say, well, I know what they're talking about, because I know you do know what they're talking about. You do. When you listen, you'll only be surprised by how blatant they still are. It'll kind of refresh your memory. It will remind you of the forces that are truly at play. Because when we talk about this black community, sometimes it feels a little bit too insulated. White people call it navel gazing, but I wouldn't go that far. But it's kind of like
define navel gazing.
It's like, well, you just think whatever you are involved in and whatever is affecting you is all there is. So it's like, you're just like, wow, look at that. What's that in there? Fascinating. But like when you look at my work, I'm constantly going at it with Wayne TV. White media, WPTA, white media, WFFT, white media, all these white media.
So your perspective and your approach, of course, you are, I guess you would call yourself a journalist or a media expert. Okay.
Social commentator.
Respect. I sell a newspaper for a living. I love it. And it is about information. It is about making people informed. Okay, but after the information, then what?
And that's what people always ask me. And my answer is, first, you have to get the information.
Absolutely.
You have to be educated, because once you get the information, whatever it is,
you can move correctly.
Then you will know personally how to go forward. Because with me, if people say, well, Dean, okay, you got this information. What are you going to do now? Well, man, I'm going to go hit the video editing, and I'm going to make a video. I'm going to get these sources, and I'm going to use Motion. I'm going to use Final Cut Pro, and I'm going to use GarageBand. I'm going to put my jams underneath. That's what Dean Robinson's going to do.
Yes,
now, what should you do? Well, you're probably going to do something else, because you have one of these speaking engagements where you're bringing somebody in, right?
Absolutely.
Well, that's what you're going to do. That's what you're going to do. And
Brother Nori, August the 3rd, 7 p.m., Summit City, Rudisill. I had to throw that in.
And so, see, you will do what you do. So that people always ask me, you get the information, now what? Well, get the information. Take that first step. So once you get that first step, then come to me. And it's got to be specific. And so my thing is always going to be, inform yourself, get that information, educate yourself, because once you get that, you personally will know how to go forward. Dean Robinson will make a video. He might write a song. But other people might do something else. Somebody else might say, well, I'm going to go help this political candidate, or I'm going to push this legislation, because it's like we need all these pieces.
We need all of the pieces.
So where's our politician? Is Glenn Hines our politician?
Okay, now this is where I have to interject, because I have a question. I'm very big around collective and cooperative economics, but I'm also very big about operational economics. And the difference is the organization of things, the high man, little man hierarchy of things. That's where our politicians are supposed to have a place. That's where within the Black community, our ministers, our preachers, our reverends are supposed to have a place. The hierarchy of things, the dissemination of things. We lose that in the Black community. That's one reason why, to me, there is that's a big, one of the fights facing cohesiveness is that we have no operational order to things. Everybody's just willy-nilly all over the place. How do we address that issue? I mean, if
our petty differences.
Our petty
differences.
But what if I hold strongly to a belief? Should my beliefs be quashed?
No.
Just to be a part of a group?
No, there's got to be a unifying principle.
Okay.
Let the unifying principle be truth. Let's unify on the basis of fact and truth. That has to be it. Once we can unify on the principle of fact and truth, the next thing we have to do is remove fear and doubt of what it is that we're trying to accomplish.
What do you identify as some of our fears?
Of what white people are going to think about trying to have cohesion and Black unity, and what the response will be from us even talking like that?
Dean, do you believe that white people are afraid of our cohesiveness?
I don't. Sometimes they are threatened by it. Some people are. And I've always got to couch my statements with this, because, when I talk about white male domination and white supremacy, well, I'm not talking about Eric Malberg. I'm not talking about him. I'm not talking about this guy named Elmer, who I encountered at one of these wedding receptions I was DJing. An old guy. My gosh, this guy must have been 90s. Old white guy. This guy shuffles across the dance floor to give me a cupcake.
Oh, how sweet.
She's like, well, I didn't think anybody was thinking about you. I'm like, thank you, Elmer.
Just decency.
And I'm
human
Dean.
decency.
And so then a little bit later, this mug, again, doing this slow shuffle where I'm like, wow, this mug could fall. But he's got a Pabst Blue Ribbon and a hugger, giving that to me. It's like, man, I thought you might want something to wash down that cupcake. And so when I talk about, old white men, and sometimes these old traditions of racism held on, I'm not talking about Elmer. I'm not talking about Eric Malberg. And so that's what becomes troublesome sometimes when people have these conversations about race. We don't want to offend people, but we got to talk about it. But then people like Eric Malberg and like Terry Duran, when I start talking about...
But shouldn't those people know that if
when I talk about
hurt toe says ouch, if your toe ain't hurt, don't say ouch.
Well, when I talk about Eric Malberg, God rest his soul.
Amen.
And Terry Duran, still walking the earth. Well, when I talk to those guys about white male domination in America, well, they're going to say, well, yeah, Dean, we know.
Right,
and here's some other stuff.
Right. That's acknowledging white privilege.
And I made a broad stroke when I said what white people think.
And that's okay.
And I meant to say, or I should say, to clarify what I meant, white establishment, white power establishment being upset.
But when I talk,
Or those
And according
who-
to the CIA, Dean, tell them that's entities, corporations. That is just not
who move other people
That's
who
right.
don't have power.
well,
so.
when I talked earlier about the interaction between myself and Kevin, where we can, we might dog each other, but we're getting these ideas out. A lot of people are afraid of that dynamic. And so for me, I'm not afraid of it. I realize that, man, I may have to apologize to Elmer. I may have to make a statement to make sure he knows where I'm coming from. And his knowledge might be different from an Eric Malberg. And so I know that I have to do that. And sometimes I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to say what I say, and somebody's going to be offended, whether they get it or not. Now, I'm going to find, with regard to white and black people and kind of going forth and doing things, look at the X Games. You ever watch ESPN, watch the X Games?
Years ago.
Well, if it's still the same now. It's mainly these white guys doing all these stunts and whatnot. These mugs that are paragliding and hang gliding, jumping out of planes. Do you realize that those are usually white people doing that stuff?
Right.
And I'm sure there's plenty of black comedians riffing on that, talking about how white people will jump out of a plane and they'll do all this crazy adventurous
Daredevils.
stuff. Well, black people are not daredevils. Do you notice that?
Right.
The last time I saw a black daredevil, I think, was the movie Earthquake. I think Richard Roundtree playing a motorcycle guy. Okay? But you got to realize, when you look at the X Games and look at all these extreme sports, all these white people, so adventurous going forth. Black people, we're trying to keep what's ours. That's the slave mentality that Eric Hackley talked about. He gave his life so we could understand these concepts. And so when you look at the X Games and you see the lack of black guys on skateboards or whatever, you got Lil Wayne. He's supposed to quit rap so he can become a skateboarder. So at least we can show some adventurous spirit, because our spirit of adventure has been destroyed by this white male-dominated culture in America. That's destroyed us. So I don't talk about being made effeminate. I will talk about what Eric Hackley talked about. I'll talk about slave mentality and how black people, we are inclined to hold on to what is ours. We're not inclined to save money. We're inclined to spend money on materials
Just
and experiences. So our mindset is so different. And so I would have to say it's that adventurous spirit that black people need to recapture in America.
I like that. That's good. That's well said. I like the way you put that. We have to overcome, and that's what I was talking about, the fear. That's the byproduct of a slave mentality, is it produces fear. We mentioned about the acts of terrorism against former black communities that were strong. Those were acts of terror. What are the acts of terror supposed to do? It's to instill fear, to never rise up and try to do something like that again in terms of being economically strong. So we have to challenge that fear, and we have to do it on a national level. What I love about the Nation of Islam that's impressive to me, and that impressed me many years ago. Wow, not a century ago, a quarter of a century ago, over a quarter of a century ago.
You've aged quite well.
Right. But when we talk about being completely independent, the Nation of Islam is completely independent. It's not supported and funded by any outside entity other than members of the Nation of Islam and those who support what the minister is doing. If we cannot grow our own food and educate our young, we're not talking about nation building. Okay? So when I look at the Nation of Islam, and we have over 100 schools throughout America, independent school system, that's impressive to me, because we can teach our own. We have our own curriculum, and we can guide and teach our babies that new idea to get them out of that perpetual slave mentality. We have a national food distribution model called the ABLE program. We have hundreds of thousands of acres of farmland in the South and the North, in Michigan, where we can feed ourselves. This is how we have to think. Now, why do we even have to think like this? And I'm going to take this to a whole nother level here. Because the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan shared with us, he said, if we don't know the knowledge of the time that we're living in, we don't know what must be done, what actions we have to take. So he asked the question, what time are we living in? He said that we're living in the prophesied time of the fall of America. That's serious. Well, he said, well, that's anti-American to talk about the fall of America. Well, nobody thought that former great governments of the past would ever fall. Nobody ever thought Rome would fall because of its military might and its power and its governmental sway over the people. Nobody ever thought that Babylon would fall. But we're living in the time of the fall of America. And if we can't see it now, America may appear to be strong if you don't know what you're looking at. But how many states in the United States are actually bankrupt right now? How many states are actually talking about seceding from the Union?
California is supposed to be openly talking
Hello?
about it.
Yep, they are.
We're in the fall and breakup of America. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad said these wise words. He said that America will engage itself in so many wars around the earth that it will be spread so thinly, its army will be spread so thinly, it won't be able to win another war. Mm-hmm. We see this now.
We bombed 7 countries this year, the same 7 that Obama bombed last year.
This year. And that was a preconceived idea that was first presented to President Bill Clinton. He rejected the idea. And that's when all of the scandal of his personal life came out as a backlash from his rejecting the idea. President Obama took the idea, and it appears as though President Trump is continuing the same idea to dismantle 7 Muslim countries in 5 years. We see this. Now, let me say this bit about the fall of America.
But can I throw a side note in? The countries that he's disbanding are also, I want to make note, not a part of the central bank, which I think is very curious.
Right.
Is that the countries that they are targeting are not a part of the larger scheme of who controls the almighty dollar.
Correct.
So, and that's something to be said. All of those countries who joined
those are the ones who they refer to as evil dictators and are killing their own people. The nerve of the American government to point the finger about who's killing their own people.
Kevin, I have a kind of tough question for you.
I want to finish my point.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
In this war, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said that America's last fight would be in Eastern Germany. And this the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said in the mid-60s. And he said America would have to go back to Germany again and fight as it did in World War II or the previous world wars. And that in that war, America would go away, its army in the tens of thousands, and would only return in the tens. That America's 6th and 7th Fleet in its Navy would be totally annihilated. And there would be the decline of the American dollar. And at that time, there would be no such thing as an American government. These are prophetic words that we see happening right now as we watch world news and pay attention to world events. The whole situation with Ukraine and the so-called invasion of Russia into this territory. This is setting the stage of what the Honorable Elijah Muhammad would say would happen. Now, with the decline of the dollar and no such thing as an American government, what does that look like inside the borders of America? You call that anarchy. You call that a lawless environment. there's going to come a time when we won't have to worry about a separate state of territory for our people. It'll be available. So I'm just sharing with you the future of things as the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan has shared it, but we're going to be forced into this situation. It is the will of Allah. It is the will of God that his people be restored. That this land that we have fought, bled, and died for, but still receive no freedom, justice, and equality. Our suffering of our people is not in vain. This is our promised inheritance. The land that we're standing on right now is that promised land.
It's funny that you bring that up. I love to research and study. One of the people that I researched and studied was Albert Pike. Have you ever heard of Albert Pike?
I've heard the name.
Albert Pike predicted that the Muslims would return to Germany. This is World War III. They would return to Germany and they would destroy. The Muslims would return for the war. They would destroy Christianity, and then the Jews would destroy the Muslims.
You need to start listening to Whoa Whoa AM, Pat Miller. He's just bringing you a dumber version of what Pike talks about.
Yeah.
And so you've asked me.
Well, I like Glenn Beck, so I ain't knocking nobody on.
So
Whoa
you guys
Whoa,
have asked me sometimes, well,
listen.
what should we do? What should we do? Kevin Muhammad, I'm going to ask you, please listen to Whoa Whoa from 3 to 6, the Pat Miller program, for 1 week. Now on Fridays, he has a free-for-all. Anybody can call. Throughout the week, you will hear him regularly bashing Mexicans, bashing Muslims, and the LGBT community, and talking about abortion on a regular basis. It's like a regular cycle. So if you listen for a week, I guarantee you will hear at least one, you'll probably hear about 3 different commentaries of him dogging Muslims. He says Islam is a violent religion. So people like you, he says you and ISIS, the Islamic State. I'm serious, Kevin. He says that
I think we had a conversation.
He says that you and the Islamic State are practicing the exact same religion. That's what he says. He says religion is a religion of violence. Yeah. That's what he
like
says.
Saying the Klan and the regular Christians.
But I know it's ridiculous. I know it is. And I know the inclination is to laugh it off. But I've got to say, Kevin,
there are people who believe that.
If we're not addressing people like Pat Miller on Whoa Whoa AM, if we're not being that direct, especially when it comes to broadcasters, this guy just the other day bragging about some 50,000 listeners. Now, I don't know if that's true, but I know Whoa Whoa is very powerful. And so I'm asking you, listen to the show for a week and then confront this guy. He will, at some point throughout any week, he will tell you how evil Islam is. Now, I've read this Quran, and the first time I read it, I was like, this monk sure does seem a lot like this Bible. It is so quite similar. And then the version I had, well, it doesn't say Allah. That's the first thing I'm looking for. It's like, where's all these Allah references?
That's
it's just
an
God.
Interesting
It's just all this God. And I'm like, well, when you do that, because I understand with these different translations, I mean, you would say Yahweh or whatever. I talk about the Lord.
Good.
I talk about the Lord.
Same thing.
I don't talk about God.
Yeah.
I don't talk about Jesus Christ.
Right.
I talk about Jesus, and I talk about the Lord. But please, my action request to you, listen to Pat Miller and then confront him, particularly as it has to do with Islam. Nicole, my action request to you?
Yes.
Start becoming politically active. Either maybe you're not the candidate, but you need to start looking for candidates, being a part of candidates. Glenn Hines is the worst. You need to start calling his phone. You need to start talking to him about these concerns that you have about the black community. Because the black community that you're a part of is called Fort Wayne. Glenn Hines is the black man on city council who could be doing something, but he's not properly challenged. The Republican Party, Steve Shine, the former Democrat, he doesn't care about Glenn Hines because he knows Glenn Hines will be right there to raise taxes on you for downtown development. So I'm saying Nicole. I'm saying Janine. Janine, I'm saying please start taking it at Glenn Hines. So Glenn Hines, He's a person. He's government. He's black community in Fort Wayne. That is a person. He's the name of your pain. The name of your pain is Glenn Hines. Kevin Muhammad, the name of your pain is Pat Miller.
He named our pain.
The name of your pain.
I got to ask the question before my time runs out, because there's something that you mentioned earlier that I want to address. Within the Nation of Islam, we talk about cohesiveness, but I often wonder, and I'm just going to be frank because I need an honest answer. Women, from the outside looking in, I have been working on to interview a member of the MGT.
It's coming up real
because
soon.
I need one.
Ooh.
Because I need their conversation.
So
I know
what's the name of the
MGT, which is their female NOI,
Stands
fruit
for
of NY.
Muslim Girls
In training. And
Nice.
but I've never met one. I learn about things from the man point of view.
Very good.
But they shelter their women for good reason. So that's a reason why I can't get out of them, and I can't get, because they're protected. But for a woman, some women
I got something
feel
good for you.
that some women feel that there is a male dominance in the Nation of Islam, which would interfere with the cohesiveness. If I'm a single mom, I do my best not to feminize my own son. I say that with complete confidence, and I'm serious. Between competing with the vaccinations and the images that he sees and the foods that he consumes, I compete not to feminize my own son with those things, the things that I can control. There are things that I cannot control, but there are the outlook that the Nation of Islam has this hierarchy that puts women below. Now, I approach my role as I am the neck that turns the head. The man can be the head, that's fine. But your head ain't going nowhere without that neck. It will just sit there. It will have no purpose. It will have no function. So how does the Nation of Islam plan to, because that's a real image for you guys
That's
with
a
women.
false image, and that's a misnomer. I will have to say that. A very false image. That's something that people have said without actually knowing what they're saying. Is certainly not the image that we put out. In fact, in the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's books, it's been our teaching for quite some time that a nation, any nation, can rise no higher than the status of its women. So if you put your woman down and she gives birth to the future of your nation,
then
you're putting down your nation. This inferiority position in terms of oppressing women does not exist in the Nation of Islam. If it exists on any level, you can say that would exist in any faith, any household where there's a domestic issue, but that's not because of Islam. That's something personal with you and your spouse. But we have many female doctors, lawyers,
one great speaker,
surgeons. I said I had something good for you, didn't I? And of course, I think you're mentioning Dr. Ava Muhammad, which is one of the national spokespersons for the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, and a dynamic human being to boot. She has been placed, the first female minister that was placed over an entire mosque. That's unheard of in Islam, anywhere in the world. For a woman to be over the mosque as its
because in the Christian community, they won't let some women step on the pulpit.
So if the accusation is made or the image is out there that people who put down their women, maybe it would be another religious house, but not ours. Okay. Our chief principle is to protect our women. You said that. You mentioned the word sheltered. So one of the main reasons why the Muslim woman is covered the way that she is in public is not for oppression, not to make her feel less than, but anything of value that you have, you don't leave it out in the open.
And all attention ain't good attention. That's
you
for
wrap
sure.
it up and you cover it. And you better hide it in the world that you live in today, where men have become like dogs when it comes to, the female presence.
Y'all pretty covered up too, though, I might say. That's what I've always said. Yeah, I mean, I would feel bad if y'all got to walk around shirtless and I had to wear the entire garb.
And that's
their men are as covered up.
They're wearing suits.
In the American society, a man
up.
is permitted and it's socially acceptable for a man to be out bare chest.
A woman can too if she covers her nipples.
Well, no, not in our society.
Well, I mean, in the United States, if I cover my nipples and I stepped outside, I would not be. I would not be breaking the law. Not that I would do that, people.
I mean, with the law, it's nice. I mean, you got these laws. I think it's whatever. If people can go around naked, well, we have a choice. We have these choices to make.
Yeah.
And I realize with a lot
there's consequences to the choices.
A lot of times,
yeah, stop saying in Africa that we ran around naked. That is, if you do your research, that was not our original dress.
That's correct.
I think the Nation of Islam or Islam gets a bad rap. Largely in America, the Nation of Islam is not mainstream. So like if I watch a television show, religious icons are usually going to be represented by the Catholic Church.
Yep.
So you usually see Catholic priests.
Yep.
Blue Bloods on CBS is probably the prime example.
Yes.
And so it's not very often that religious figures other than rabbis or priests are even presented in our media. So we kind of lose it. Other than that, a lot of people are getting Islam confused with theocracies, these governments. And so anytime you have any religious doctrine that they say, well, this is also your government law, you're probably going to have a lot of problems with that in any case. And so in America, these monks, a lot of the guys like Pat Miller, he'll tell you that the United States was founded on liberty and Christian values. Okay?
But just know that those things, we were not written in to be included.
Well,
that's correct.
Obviously. So when Kevin hears Pat Miller talking about this freedom and equality that these forefathers brought on, and he's going to talk about all this Christianity, well, Kevin's going to hear it. And then he can understand, well, wow, a lot of people who listen to this guy, who listen to him preach, because he's a preacher and an insurance salesman, that's why he hates Obamacare. Well, when you listen to him, you're going to hear the fear. You're going to hear the thought processes that are being broadcast, that are being promoted, and sometimes being reflected. And so a lot of it, when Janine talks about, women don't look like they have a high profile in the Nation of Islam. Well, from the outside looking in, it looks that way because we usually see the Minister Farrakhan. And other than that, we don't see a lot nationally. We just see him. So
unless you follow.
So we're just seeing him.
Minister Ava's out there.
And then a lot of times he's just bringing this truth, and the mainstream media they just bring the most raw stuff. White devils. And it's like, well, there are some white devils out here. There really are. Not all these monks, but they're out here. And so I think our view of it gets distorted because if you really want to talk about sexism and pedophilia, talk about the Roman Catholic Church. Because with the Nation of Islam, I haven't heard boo about pedophilia.
And
these Catholics, they can't stop it. They paid billions of dollars over the past 60-some years
cover it up.
The Catholic Almanac will tell you that. To cover it up, to mitigate, to pay lawyers. Now you have a recent scandal in Rome within the last month where the cardinal's men at one of these apartments, these monks having a gay sex orgy. These priests.
Yeah.
Priests.
This is the foundation of American culture.
Yes.
This is the foundation.
And so the cops, I guess people have to call the cops because these monks partying hard.
Yeah.
But when the cops get there, a lot of these monks passed out. So they have to wake up the priest engaged in an orgy to arrest them.
Oh,
and so the people that were there partying, having these priests having sex with one another, well, they're part of the council that people have to report to concerning all this church pedophilia. And then if I talk about Monsignor Meth, Kevin Wallen from Connecticut, while the show Breaking Bad was the big hit, the teacher making meth, while that was on TV, you have a real guy, Kevin Wallen, Monsignor Meth in Connecticut. He's in prison now, maybe getting out, but he was found guilty of running a multi-state meth dealing ring. He was laundering his money through a sex shop that he called Dorothy's Land of Oz. That's how he's laundering his meth money. Meanwhile, in Connecticut, he's going to plays with the cardinal. These monks reviewing plays together. He's
Birds of a feather.
He's having gay sex in the rectory. But somehow Monsignor Meth, Kevin Wallen, America doesn't know who that is, but they know who Breaking Bad is all about. A fictional tale about a teacher making math, but a Catholic priest having gay sex in the rectory with Dorothy's Land of Oz, a sex store.
It's the finger pointing contest is what that is.
And so I would say, Janine, don't worry about the Nation of Islam and this sexism stuff. If you want to talk about sexism and religion, talk about the Roman Catholic Church and get out the catechism of the Roman Catholic Church, because that's the rule book. The catechism, not the Holy Bible.
And I want you to know, when they're youth, they have to go through the catechesis.
The papal bulls that have been signed by previous priests as well, that sanctioned not only the transatlantic slave trade, but exactly what he's talking about right now, that said that it's okay, it's a part of what we do. This is the fundamental establishment of the American foundation. It wasn't even justice and equality among them, let alone the other races or that have populated America. Certainly not us.
And when you look at these Catholics, well, the Roman Catholic Church, very Nazi friendly. Because during World War II, well, Rome is in Italy, right? Winston Churchill called Italy the soft, white underbelly of Nazi Europe. And so if you want to talk about religious oppression and pedophilia and crime, talk about the Roman Catholic Church, talk about Pope Francis. Don't talk about anybody else.
Well, thank you for that, Dean. I want to give you guys a couple of minutes to sum up. I have one question that I'd like both of you to answer. What is it going to take for the community, the melanated community, to cohesively exist? Kevin, you go. I'm going to give you guys about a minute and a half.
The first thing that it's going to take is the knowledge of self, of who we are as a people, and where not only our rich past is, but where our prophesied future is and must be. The knowledge of self. Who are you, black man? Who are you, black woman? Who are you? Who are we as a people? Who are we in God? Or as Mr. Dean would say, the Lord. Who are we in God? Our goal in life is to reflect the Creator, who is the author of our life. The scripture says that he created us in his image and in his likeness. If we are created in the image and likeness of God, image means physical representation. Likeness means ways and habits and characteristics. If this is who we are, then when I look at you, I should see God. When I think of myself, I should see God. And if that's my perspective of self, and when I look at you, then I'm going to look at you as I'm dealing with a God. This is the only unifying principle at the foundation of our cohesiveness, is how we see self and how we see one another. That's the only unifying principle at the foundation. Then from there, we can build on unity with economics and political aspirations and so on and so forth.
Dean?
I'm just going to say, not everybody's going to get along with everybody all the time. You will find common goals. That's when you can align. Other than that, black people, recapture your sense of adventure. Take some risks. There are things worth living for. There are also things worth fighting and dying for. There's also sometimes you do have to jump out of an airplane. So I would say, get your X Games on, black people. Become more adventurous. Don't be a daredevil, but recapture your sense of adventure.
Good.
This has been Janine Roi coming to you from the Eric Malberg Studios at the Allen County Public Library. We miss and love you, Eric. May you forever be on our wavelengths with your energy. That being said, always remember to read, research, realize, remember, and respect. Because at the end of the day, only you can decide what is best for you. Thank you guys and have a great day.